soft and rough field operations. Why you need to learn how to operate out of soft or rough fields. Well, you need to learn these techniques to pass your FAA check ride, but the biggie to me is there's a lot more short or rough or both fields in the world than there are long, hard runways. But that's not the half of it. These little out-of-the-way airports have to be the most interesting of all. There's the Ruby Hill Winery in the Salinas Valley of California. It didn't actually have an airport, but there was a trop duster strip right next to it that I can land on, and then we walked over to the winery. Tunnel Meadows at 9,800 feet in the Sierra Nevadas. Smith Valley on the Smith River in southern Oregon. A sand spit somewhere near Fairbanks, Alaska. And Papa Diaz Hotel, if you can call it a hotel, about 300 nautical miles south of the U.S. border on the Baja side of the Sea of Cortez. And other fun places I've been to. Let me tell you about this video. I have assumed that you have studied videos 1 and 2 about crosswind landings and takeoffs. If you haven't, I strongly encourage you to watch them first. Many, if not most, of the small airports from the Rockies to the West Coast are high, short, and rough. So I encourage you to study those subjects if you plan to fly in the West. Since the Cessna 152 is the most common trainer in the U.S., I'll use it for examples. Now, the nose wheel is the weakest part of the undercarriage on a tricycle landing gear airplane. So for both soft and rough field operations, we need to be especially protective of the nose wheel. Anytime you move on these fields, you want to pull all the way back on the elevator control to lighten up the load on the nose wheel. The exception being a takeoff. Once your airspeed is high enough to pull the nose gear clear of the ground, just hold it there until you're airborne. Remember that a little blast from the propeller sends additional wind over the elevator, making it more effective at that moment. You may need to do this to safely pass over some rough spots or pull the nose out of the mud. You need to protect your mains too. So you'll want to lighten up your main gear. That'll protect it in muddy situations. You certainly don't want to get stuck. That's why you need to keep 10 degrees of flaps down. Prop wash, the term used for air being blown by your propeller, and wind blowing past your wing will generate more lift even at low speeds. This is especially true when you have 10 degrees of flaps down and the slightly tail-low attitude that up elevator causes. Any lift that your wings generate is that much less load on your main gear. Let me make a few comments about flaps that I haven't before. Just a small amount of flaps generates a lot of lift and not much drag. 10 degrees of flaps is certainly such a situation. Beyond 10 degrees, flaps on most single-engine Cessna airplanes increase lift up to a maximum at about 35 degrees. By the time you have 40 degrees down, the wings actually have a lower coefficient of lift. Unfortunately, beyond 10 degrees, drag increases much faster than lift. In that case, you will have to use a longer runway to get off. Please note that a Cessna 152's maximum flap extension is 30 degrees. However, the Cessna 150, 172, 182, 206, 207, 210, 177 extend to 40 degrees or more, but still hit a maximum at around 35. Rough fields can be hard on propellers. Rough fields are often dry. When there is no wind, a turning propeller forms sort of a donut in the air, very similar to a smoke ring. Air pressure ahead of the prop is low and air pressure behind it is high. The high pressure air moves forward around the propeller to fill in the partial vacuum in front. The air that passes below the propeller picks up debris that is sucked back through the whirling propeller. Some of the debris can nick the prop and damaging it, in fact does. How you can protect your prop. If possible, park on a hard, clean surface. If you can't, start the engine with your airplane pointed into the wind. an amazingly mild wind can keep the donut from forming. Some pilots do their magneto checks and run up on the hard surface before taxiing for takeoff. Others develop a technique for dragging their brakes and doing a run-up while they're taxiing. I recommend that you taxi with your elevator pulled all the way back so that any wind or prop wash will tend to pull your nose up further from the gravel. When you are on a soft or rough surface, 10 degrees of flaps full up elevator if the wind conditions allow it, and keep moving on your takeoff. Remember that when you stop, you are more likely to sink into a soft surface, and when you start, you are more likely to damage your prop on a dirty surface, so keep moving. Especially on a soft field, keep moving as you enter the active runway, a good idea on a rough field too. It's okay to drag your brakes once you are on your takeoff roll to build to full power quickly while you have a lot of runway ahead of you. Once airborne, put the airplane its normal climb attitude with full power, retract the flaps, taking care to hold a constant pitch attitude. Stay centered over the runway or the runway's extended center line. Now let's talk about landing on a rough or soft field. The ideal landing on a soft or rough field is a very soft landing. The gentlest landing is an attitude landing rather than a full stall one. To make it even smoother, you should land with about 1500 RPM rather than idle power. Now, if this were an airplane with a constant speed propeller, instead of 1500 RPM, it would be 14 or 15 inches manifold pressure. So conduct a landing just like you would any other crosswind landing. Remember that we are now making all landings with crosswind landing techniques. The difference is that you never reduce your power below 1500 RPM. Once you get to the third step, slow flight at a foot or less above the runway, hold a constant altitude until you get to a best rate of climb attitude. Then hold that attitude until you touch down. You can close the throttle then until you slow to taxi speed, but keep that nose up as long as possible and make certain that it touches very gently. During the rollout, keep moving until you are on a safe place to stop. Retract the flaps to 10 degrees unless the wind is so gusty that you need your wings in a minimum lift configuration. Then pull the flaps up all the way. Keep your elevator control all the way back to protect your nose wheel. So you have learned to keep the elevator up and the flaps down to 10 degrees most of the time. Not to stop until it's safe. How to protect your propeller when taxiing over debris field.